This is something that happened not too long ago. I go to Chipotle all the time, and it's one of my favorite restaurants. There are also several locations that are pretty close to where I live. So most of the time when I get it, I order on the app, and then I just stop by and pick it up. Every time it's just waiting in the bag on the shelf inside the restaurant. I also get points on the app, and then I end up getting free stuff. Many times I get it on my way back from work or the gym when I'm starving. This is a routine that I've done pretty regularly for probably over a year. One time a few months ago, I ordered Chipotle on my way home from work like many other times. By the time I arrived at the Chipotle, I went inside and my order was done and on the shelf. I picked it up and left. Then I drove the rest of the way back home. After getting back to my apartment, I took the food out of the bag, but I noticed something else. There was an SD card that was inside the bag as well. It was like a random SD card that goes in a camera and you can connect it to your computer. I thought that maybe it was a mistake, but then I realized, how could that be possible? Somebody had to have put it in there on purpose. You don't just accidentally drop an SD card into a bag of Chipotle. I was curious, but I was also a little weirded out by this. After thinking about it for a few minutes, I decided to put the SD card in my computer. I was just too curious. Sure, I was a little worried that it might be a virus and break my computer or hack all my information, but ultimately I did it anyways. After entering the SD card in my computer, there was just one folder that was titled Folder. So I double-clicked it and it opened several images. I think it was maybe like 5 pictures. Each picture was what looked like a man wearing this really creepy mask on his face. The mask covered his entire head, and the face of the mask had wide eyes and very white skin. It also had these creepy looking teeth. And the photos were taken with a flash in a very dark room, so I couldn't tell any other details at all. And I'm not going to lie, I was pretty creeped out. However, I figured that it was maybe just a prank. But why me? Why would somebody deliberately put this in my bag? Maybe it was random. Maybe somebody just walked up to one of the to-go orders and put it in the bag. Or maybe it was a Chipotle employee trying to be funny. The thought also occurred to me that possibly they did know who I was because I went there so often. I was considering all the possibilities, but ultimately I had no way to really find out. I wasn't going to go back to the Chipotle and investigate and interrogate the employees or anything like that, so I decided to just not go back to that Chipotle for a little while. But the story doesn't end there. It was just a few days after this when I was at home one night. It was maybe 10 o'clock and I was in my bedroom watching a show on my TV. I also live alone and have a one-bedroom place on the second floor of the building. Out of nowhere, there was a knock on the front door to my apartment. This was really strange because nothing like that had ever happened before, and I obviously was not expecting anyone. I got up and walked over to the front door out of curiosity. When I looked through the peephole, I saw a man standing there wearing that same creepy mask. He was looking right at the door. When I saw him, I'm pretty sure that I jumped back about 5 feet. In the moment, I had forgotten about the SD card and stuff, but my memory was quickly jogged. I realized that this was the same person. After a few seconds, I went back over to the door to look again. He was still there, not moving, just standing there facing the door and seemingly looking at me. He stayed there for what felt like a really long time. Then he turned and quickly walked away. I was really creeped out by the whole situation. How did he know where I lived? I didn't know what to do about it, but I told all my friends. Some of them told me to call the police, and some said that I should report it to the Chipotle. Others thought that it was funny. I didn't do anything about it though. I figured he didn't do anything illegal, and it would be pretty hard to prove to the Chipotle. Plus, what would they even do about it? Overall, it was just a really bizarre thing. For the next few days, I was nervous that the guy would come back, but he never did. I stayed away from that Chipotle and went to a different one for a while. That was like 6 months ago. I've since gone back a few times and nothing strange has happened. This still remains a mystery to me though. I used to work at a Chipotle several years ago. I didn't really work there for that long, just a few months, but it was long enough for something really crazy to happen. So I was working one night until close, which was 10 p.m. The Chipotle that I worked at was sort of in the middle of a huge shopping area. There were many stores like Target, Walmart, Costco, and others within a mile radius. There was also all the restaurants and smaller stores you could imagine as well. And sort of in the middle of this was the Chipotle. So things got pretty quiet at Chipotle at around 8 or 9 p.m. For the final hour, things really dragged on. Hardly anybody came in to order, so we started doing some cleaning. I went out and started to sweep the dining room area and clean the tables and stuff. By that point, there was just a few of us employees still there, and no customers sitting around. As I was sweeping towards the front of the store, I remember that I saw something weird. This guy came running into the parking lot at like a full sprint. He went right through it and then disappeared past the building. I only saw him for like a second because he was really flying. It seemed really weird, but I just kept working. We closed maybe 15 minutes later, and then soon after, I got off. I left the Chipotle and walked out to my car in the parking lot and got inside. My coworkers left as well, but I stayed in my car and was texting and Snapchatting some friends before I drove home. However, I was interrupted when I remember seeing something out of the corner of my eye in the mirror. I saw the running man again. He was sprinting into the parking lot once more, this time from another angle. However, as he approached my car, he slowed down to a jog. Then he went to my passenger's side door and stopped. He knocked on the window, and for some reason, I rolled it down a crack. I guess I was just curious as to what he wanted and why he was running around. The man was out of breath, and he asked if I could give him a ride. I had no idea who he was, and sprinting around like that was pretty weird, so I didn't want to. I said no, I couldn't. The guy then practically started begging me. He said he really needed just a quick ride and promised that it wouldn't be very far. I asked him where he was going. He started looking around and just said up the road. It seemed really sketchy. Then, without me even answering, the guy just gave a frustrated scoff and then frantically left. He ran away, sprinting out of the parking lot again. At that point, I figured that I should get out of there and drive home before he changed his mind and ran back or something. So I left the Chipotle and started heading home. On my way back when I was on the road, I noticed about 5 police cars with flashing lights driving on the other side of the road. They were heading towards where I had come from. I didn't know what it was, but I didn't put 2 and 2 together yet. The next morning, though, I saw it on the news. One of the businesses in that same general shopping area had been robbed at gunpoint by a man. It was the same man who I had seen running. He stole a bunch of cash, and it was less than a mile from the Chipotle. Then he ran off. I guess he also attempted a carjacking, which did not work out. He ended up being caught about a mile from the shopping center later that night in a nearby woods. I realized that I had probably seen him running from the scene of the crime, and if I had agreed to give him a ride, who knows what could have happened. I wasn't really that scared in the moment when it happened, but after the fact, it seemed a lot scarier. About a year ago, I was at Chipotle with a friend. One of my closest friends, Amy, and I were there sometime in the early afternoon. It wasn't really that busy inside of the Chipotle, but there were a few other people around. We were sitting at one end at a small table. I remember that at one point I got up to get some more lemonade. It was then that this random guy walked up and approached me. He was wearing cargo shorts, a t-shirt, and had brown hair that was sort of gray as well. The guy appeared to be in his 40s or so and walked right up to me. Then he said that he had to show me something. At that point, he started to walk away and kind of waved me over. Now, I have really no idea why I followed him, but I did. I didn't really think at all, just reacted. The way he said it made me think he was just going to the other end of the restaurant, and I was curious as to what he was talking about. But then the guy opened the one side door to the Chipotle, not the main door. This one led out to the patio area. It was a nice day, but nobody was sitting out there. We walked outside, and then the guy just kept going. He started to walk off the Chipotle property and into the parking lot of a nearby business. This parking lot was fairly large and also had a good amount of cars in it. I believe that a grocery store was the main business for that lot, but there were a few others as well. When we had made it maybe 20 feet into the parking lot, I realized that this was really strange. I asked the guy what he wanted to show me, but he didn't answer me. He just made another hand gesture for me to keep following him. I wasn't going to though. At that point, I stopped and I turned around and walked back to the Chipotle. I didn't hear the man say anything, and I'm not sure if he realized right away that I had stopped following him because he wasn't looking at me. So at that point, I just went back inside and rejoined Amy at the table. She was confused and hadn't seen me leave, but noticed that I was gone for a long time. I told her about what happened, and we both agreed that it was really strange. For the rest of the time that we were inside eating, though, the man did not return. We stayed and talked for a while, and we were there for maybe 20 more minutes. Then we left the Chipotle to go to my car, which was in the parking lot. I remember that when I parked, there were no cars on either side of me, but now there was an SUV that was parked right next to my car. As we were approaching, the same man emerged from the driver's seat of the SUV. My heart sank when I saw him. He started walking up to us and then asked me directly why I didn't follow him. I said that I had to go back, and I asked him what it was that he was trying to show me. He didn't say, but he just said that he would give me a ride and motioned for me to get into his car. Then he walked back over to his SUV and told me to get inside and opened up one of the doors. I said no thanks, we had to be going now. By this point, the man was acting beyond sketchy. Amy and I quickly got inside of my car. The man ran around though and then came up to my driver's window. I heard him telling me to get out and that I needed to go with him. I yelled loudly that he needed to leave us alone or I was going to call the police. The man finally stopped and took a few steps back. Then I put the car into reverse and started leaving. However, after backing up a few feet, the man suddenly raced over and kicked the fender of my car pretty hard. I kept backing up and then turned and put the car in drive and left. Thankfully, the man didn't try to follow us in his car, and when I looked afterwards, my car had no damage. But something about that guy was really strange. I'm not sure what exactly his plan was. Where was he trying to lead me to? I'm not really sure, but I hope that I never see him again. I worked at Chipotle for a while up until about 2 years ago. Towards the end of my time there, I remember this one incident that really made me want to quit. So I was working behind the counter, and it had been a kind of busy evening. By now, it was maybe 7:30 or 8 o'clock at night, so it was just starting to quiet down. There were a good number of people eating inside, and there was finally no line of people waiting to order anymore. I remember that a man walked in and approached me at the counter. I asked him what he wanted, and he proceeded to try to use every so-called hack and strategy under the book. He started out by asking for a bowl with brown rice and half chicken, half steak, and asked me to, quote, load it up. I asked him if he wanted a double serving of chicken or steak, and he said no, he just wanted 1/2 of each. So I gave him a generous serving of rice, but I wasn't going to risk getting in trouble and being reckless. I've never considered myself to be stingy when working there. I know some people are, but I want the customer to be happy. However, there's a line between generous and reckless. Anyways, I gave him a good amount of chicken and steak. In fact, he nearly got a full serving of each. But then after I scooped them, he was like, "Come on, you can do better." I told him I'm not giving him any more without it being a double order. Then he said he would get a double order and told me to give the exact same amount of each again. By now, I was getting really annoyed. So we finally moved on to the other ingredients, and the man asked for extra of every other thing. Then he of course asked for several extra tortillas on the side and stuff. He also asked for guacamole, and even after I told him it was extra, he said yes. Then he asked for extra guac. By that point, the bowl was like overflowing and I could barely close it with the lid. When I was ringing him up, he suddenly freaked out and said that he was not paying extra for guac. He rambled about how it doesn't cost extra anymore, which was a total lie. He also claimed that he never asked for extra chicken or steak, which he did. He called for my manager, who came by and sided with me. She saw how full the bowl was and just how much meat was in there, and she knew that there was no way that was a single serving. The man said that he refused to pay. I told him that he could leave then. By now, I was really ticked off. The guy's whole personality just really made me mad. After arguing back and forth for a short time, he then took out his cell phone and started recording me. Then he started yelling really loud, getting the whole restaurant's attention that he was, quote, getting scammed, and he started saying that I should be fired. My manager and I just stared at him and let him make a fool of himself. Everyone else in the restaurant was just staring at him like he was a weirdo. Then, after he was done with his 30-second rant, he suddenly just grabbed the bowl and made a run for it. We let him because I wasn't going to chase after this guy and tackle him for a bowl of Chipotle. Then my manager called the police. We reported the whole incident and I was able to leave a while later. I'm not sure if the man was ever found or what, but not long after, I quit. That was by far the craziest thing that ever happened when I worked there. I live in an apartment complex that's fairly new, and it's located pretty close to a few businesses. Many nights I go on walks when the weather is good, because there's a sidewalk that goes around my apartment complex. It also goes past several of the businesses and along a few streets as well. It's a nice and easy route to walk, and I prefer that over going on a treadmill. So one night I went for a walk a little bit later than usual at around 9 p.m. It was a nice night though, and the weather was good. I had worked late and wanted to get some fresh air and exercise, so I started walking, and basically the route that I took went past the apartment complex. Then I would cross the street, go past a few businesses, and then turn at the corner and walk another way that went back around the complex. It was a loop that would take about 15 minutes to walk, and I would usually walk 2 or 3 laps of it. On this night, things were very quiet with it being a little bit later. Sometimes other people would be out walking their dogs, but I didn't see anyone. So I made it past the apartment complex and I was walking past some businesses. One of those was a Chipotle. I remember looking over as I went past and I saw this man walking out of it. He seemed to look over at me, but he was really far away, well over 100 feet. I just looked away and kept walking. I continued with my walk and eventually turned and went along the street. I made it back around to my apartment a while later and then decided to walk another lap, maybe two. So I continued on and eventually I was walking past the Chipotle again. When I did, I noticed that the man who I had seen was still there. This was pretty strange. It was like 15 or 20 minutes later, but the guy looked like he had barely moved 5 feet. He was just standing around next to the building and appeared to be looking right at me. I looked at him for a moment and then continued. The man then seemed to start walking in my direction. I just kept going and didn't look back at him. I reached the corner and turned where I usually did, and then started walking along the street. It wasn't until about 5 minutes later that I looked behind me. When I did, I noticed that the man was there walking a pretty far ways back. I found this odd, but I wasn't nervous or anything yet. I kept going, and after turning another corner, I looked behind me once again. After a short time, I saw the man come around the corner. He was still walking behind me. I told myself that it was just a coincidence, and at that point, it very well could have been. I didn't look behind me for a long time, not until I got to my apartment again where I would start and end the walks. There I glanced back, and the man was still there, but still a long ways behind me. I had been planning on doing another lap. I had a sort of bad feeling, like maybe the man was following me. Still, I told myself that I was just being paranoid, and I kept going. So I continued walking, and when I got towards the Chipotle again, the man was still behind me, except now he looked closer than before. Now I knew this was not a coincidence. Why would he leave the Chipotle just to walk around and then go back to it? I started walking faster and told myself not to look back. About 10 minutes later, when I was by the street, I couldn't help myself and I looked. The man was still there and even closer to me than before, even after I had started walking faster. Now I was regretting doing another lap and I just wanted to get back to my apartment. As I kept walking, I could sense that the guy was getting closer and closer. I continued at my fast pace. I turned at the corner before my apartment and I was nearly running. I didn't look back or anything. Finally, I reached my apartment building. It was not the main door to the place, but a side one. I went inside quickly and made sure that the door shut and locked. Then I started going up the stairs, which were right there. When I got to the second floor, I looked out of the window in the stairwell. I saw the man standing there and trying to open the door, but he couldn't get in, so clearly he didn't live there. When I was looking at him, he looked up and noticed me, and then he started knocking on the door. I ignored it and quickly moved away from the window and went to my apartment. After that, I made sure not to walk at night for a while. I'm not sure what that man wanted or who he was, but it's very strange. I get Chipotle quite often, and usually I go and order it at the restaurant. It's always pretty quick, and there's a Chipotle less than 10 minutes from my apartment. But a couple of months ago, I saw on the Chipotle app that I could get a free delivery. I can't remember why, but it was a limited time deal, so I decided to use it. It was a little bit later at night, maybe 9 p.m., and I had recently got home from work. Chipotle sounded great, so I ordered it and used the free delivery. After that, I went to take a shower and change. So when I was just about done in the shower, I heard a knock on the door and figured that the Chipotle was delivered. I finished showering and put my clothes on. Then I went to the door. After opening it and looking out into the hallway, I was expecting to see the food, but there was nothing there. So I went back and checked on my phone. I had no idea why else there would be a knocking on my door. Sure enough, it said that my order had in fact been delivered. This was very confusing to me. I went out and looked into the hallway again. There was definitely nothing there, and I had heard the knock on the door. So what else could it have been? I realized it was very possible somebody stole the food. If someone walking by in my hallway saw Chipotle sitting there and wanted it, they could have just took it. I called the Chipotle saying that I didn't get my order and thought that it was stolen. It was a little bit awkward, but they eventually ended up delivering another one to me. This time I was right there at the door when it arrived. Still, I was very angry that somebody had stolen it the first time. I didn't think the people who lived in my building would do that. I mean, I knew a good number of my neighbors. I didn't know any of them really that great, but they all seemed nice. Well, after Chipotle, I went to bed. The next morning, when I left my apartment, I saw there was a note taped to the outside of my door. I took it off and read it. The note said, "Thanks for the Chipotle last night," and then there was a sort of creepy smile face on the note as well. I was disgusted when I read it. Whoever had stolen my food was now teasing me about it. I didn't know what could be done though. My apartment does not have security cameras in the hallways, and I didn't think there was any way of me being able to figure it out. I wasn't going to knock on every door and confront people about it, accusing them. So I ripped up the note and threw it away, and hoped that I would never have anything like that happen again. Well, after work that day, I cooked something at home. The next morning, I once again had another note on my door. This one said, "No food for me last night?" Once more, I was very angry. Whoever was doing this really had some nerve to keep putting notes on my door. I just threw this one in the trash as well. I went out into the hallway and looked around, but nobody was out. So fast forward to the very next night. I was at home by myself, and it was probably like 10 p.m. Out of nowhere, I heard a knocking at my door. I just had a feeling that it was the same person who had been messing with me. I mean, there was really no reason for somebody to be knocking on my door. When I heard the knocking, I happened to be in my kitchen, which is very close to the doorway. I walked right over to it and opened it up. When I did, nobody was there, but I heard footsteps quickly moving away. I looked and saw a man going around the corner where the hallway turned. I only saw him for a second, and I did not recognize him. I left my apartment and decided to go after him. I went to the corner and saw him go into the stairwell. When he did, I went in after him. However, I kept my distance and was quiet. I do not think that he knew I was following him because I was a decent ways back. After making it to the stairs, he went up one floor and then into the hallway. When I opened up the door from the stairwell, I just barely saw him entering an apartment unit. I walked right over to it and then knocked on the door. At first, nobody answered. I figured that this guy would not answer the door, but I at least knew where he lived. I decided to knock again though, and surprisingly, this time the door opened up. But it was not the same guy. A woman was standing there. I did not know her, but I did recognize her and had seen her in the building before. She asked me what I wanted so late at night and seemed kind of annoyed. I asked her who the man was who had just entered the apartment, and she said it was her boyfriend. She said that he was staying with her for a couple of days. I told her that he stole my Chipotle several nights ago and was now messing with me. As I was saying this, I actually saw the guy walk by in the apartment behind her. He seemed to overhear and then walked over to us. The woman was starting to say that she had no idea what I was talking about and she was really confused, but the man interrupted the conversation and said that I was crazy and it never happened. I said that I had just seen him knock on my door and run away minutes earlier. The woman then seemed to question her boyfriend. I remember she said that he had just been gone for a minute and then asked him where he went. I don't remember what excuse he started to make up, but the woman didn't seem to believe him. She then said she remembered him having Chipotle the other night as well. The guy was still claiming that I was making it up and stuff, but the two of them were seeming to get into an argument. I was just standing there in the doorway now watching them. The woman soon asked if I could go and shut the door, but they continued to argue. I felt that I had probably solved the case, and I figured that the guy would not do something like that again, so I left and headed back to my apartment. I was really shocked at what I had just seen. So I got back to my place and I was going to start getting ready for bed. However, probably about 15 minutes or so later, there was a loud knocking at my door, and the knocking soon turned into a very loud banging. I went to the door and looked through the peephole. The man was back, and he was angrily banging on my front door. I yelled from the other side that I was calling the cops. The man did not stop, and kept literally punching at my door. I dialed 911 and reported the situation. It sounded like the man soon began to kick at my door then. This went on for a good 2 or 3 more minutes before stopping. The man finally then stormed off. About 10 minutes later, the police arrived. I told them what I knew, and they said they would go to the apartment that the guy was staying at. Well, I found out later that he had left. I guess he had in fact been staying for a few days with the woman he was dating, but after their argument, she kicked him out, and then he started banging at my door, I guess out of anger. After that, he left the place. I later heard that he had anger issues and a troubled past. The woman and him broke up though, so I haven't had to deal with him since. I used to work at a Chipotle. It was one of my first jobs that I had when I was younger. So I got the job there when I was 17 and in high school. It was very nice because the Chipotle I worked at was less than a mile from my house. I lived with my parents and brother in this neighborhood that was basically behind the Chipotle. The restaurant was off a busier road and there was a Starbucks and some other stuff connected to it. But it made it really easy for me to be able to walk to and from work every day because I didn't have a car at the time, and a lot of shifts that I would work would happen when my parents were still working. So one time I walked to work for a pretty typical shift at Chipotle. I worked from sometime in the afternoon until 9 p.m. and we closed at 10. I was working behind the counter and getting the customers what they wanted. There was a decent amount of customers most of the day from what I remember. I just know that at one point I was getting a bowl for this guy and he was telling me what he wanted. When we got to the end, out of nowhere, he asked me what time I got off of work. I didn't really know what to say and I just told him 9. I wasn't sure why he was asking because we hadn't been having a conversation other than what he wanted in his bowl. Then he had just asked me that. However, after I told him, he just said okay and didn't really say anything else. He then went and sat down someplace in the restaurant. I went back to work to help the next customers. I continued with work for probably an hour at least. It was then that I was randomly looking around and I realized that the same guy was still there. He was sitting sort of in the corner. He was not eating anymore, but just sitting at a table by himself. I found it to be a little bit odd that he had been there for so long. However, I just continued with work and didn't really think too much of it. But hours later, I remember noticing that the guy was still there. He had been there for such a long time that this was now pretty suspicious. After remembering him asking about what time I got off, I couldn't help but wonder if he was waiting for me. I didn't really notice him looking at me or anything, but I didn't know what he was doing. He was just sitting there, mostly looking at his phone on the table. By now, it was about 8 o'clock, and I got off in about 1 hour. I hoped that in that time period he would leave, and I did my best to forget about it. Over the next hour, we didn't get that many customers. Finally, 9 o'clock came, and I was off, and I went to leave the place. When I did, I noticed that the man was still there. I hurried out the door and then went past the Starbucks to the street that went to my neighborhood. It wasn't until I had started walking on that street that I heard footsteps behind me. I looked back over my shoulder and noticed the same guy. I had a terrible feeling about it when I saw him. He was probably 50 feet back, but walking the same way that I was. I knew there was no way that this was a coincidence. I walked the way back home for a few minutes, but I was feeling really nervous. I was hoping that the man would not get closer to me. I checked, and he seemed to be about the same distance away. However, I did not feel comfortable leading this guy to my house where I lived. I had the idea then to call my parents. I got out my cell phone and I called my dad. Luckily, he picked up, and I told him what was going on. My dad said that he would come and pick me up. I continued with the walk home and checked over my shoulder again. When I did, I noticed that the guy was a little closer than before. I hoped that my dad would get there soon. Several minutes later, I saw his car headed down the street towards me. When it got close enough, I ran out into the street and I got in the back door. It felt great to be in the car and out of the street with the guy. I then looked, and the guy who had been following me suddenly ran into somebody's backyard. My dad took out his phone and called the police. He reported what happened, but he had lost track of the guy. The police looked around the area, but I think the man got away. I'm just grateful that my dad answered his phone when he did and could come and pick me up. I got a ride to and from work for a while after that. I never saw the guy again though, and nothing like that happened the rest of the time that I worked at Chipotle. A couple of years ago, I went to Chipotle with a friend of mine, Jordan. We were hanging out and we went to a store nearby. When we were really hungry, we went to the Chipotle that was basically in the same parking lot. There were lots of businesses in the area. So anyways, we went inside, ordered, and got our food. We then went to a table sort of at the front of the restaurant and sat down. There were a decent amount of other people sitting around the restaurant and eating. I would say that it was decently busy. So at some point, I remember feeling my phone vibrate in my pocket from getting a text. Jordan and I were talking, and I mentioned that somebody was texting me. I took out my phone and looked, and it was a number that I did not recognize. The text said, "I'm in Chipotle with you, and I'm watching you right now." When I saw the text, I showed it to Jordan. We both laughed at first, and thought that it had to be a friend who we knew that was trying to prank me. But then I remember looking around the restaurant just out of curiosity. When I did, I noticed that sitting in the corner of the restaurant, there was a man looking at me. In fact, he waved when I saw him. It wasn't quite a friendly wave though, but more of just kind of weird. I looked at this guy and had no idea who he was. I didn't know how he would get my number either. Jordan did not know who he was as well. I texted the guy back, asking who he was. He texted back saying, "Never mind who I am, I know who I am. Do you know who you are?" Obviously, this was very strange, and it also confused me. I didn't even know what he meant when he said that. I looked back at the man, and he was still just staring at me. I then blocked his number, and went back to talking to Jordan. I hoped that the guy would realize that I was not amused by his little prank, and that he would leave. Still, I couldn't help but feel pretty creeped out by the whole thing. This guy had somehow got my phone number and knew who I was. I didn't get another text from him though because I had blocked his number. I tried not to look back at him, but eventually I did. When I did, I saw him get up from his seat. He then started walking close to Jordan and I. I got a little nervous, not knowing what this guy could do, but he then stopped at a table that was literally next to ours and then sat down. He looked at us both as he did so. I remember that I asked him what he was doing. The guy didn't say anything. He stood there, just staring for a few moments. I asked him again, and he then put his hand up as if to say, "Just a minute." I actually thought that he was going to speak, and it looked like he was going to, but then he just turned and walked away. He walked all the way to the door and then left the Chipotle. I kept watching him until he was out of sight. Jordan and I both talked about the guy for the rest of the time that we were at Chipotle. We had no idea what had just happened. Then we left, and neither of us has seen the guy since. I still have no idea how he got my number, or what exactly he was doing there. I used to work at a Chipotle several years ago. I worked there for a few months. However, this is something that happened after my time of working there. Even though I didn't work at Chipotle for that long, I still loved the food. I went to get it all the time, not at the location that I worked at usually though. Anyways, one night I had been out pretty late and I got really hungry. On my way home, I went to a Chipotle to get some food. It was probably like 9 something at night. When I pulled into the parking lot, I didn't bother to look and realize that they were closed. So I got out of my car and I walked all the way to the door before realizing that they were not open. I was confused at first because I thought they were open until 10 p.m. For whatever reason, they were closed though. I did notice that sitting on the sidewalk sort of near the door was a woman wearing a Chipotle shirt and hat. When she saw me, she said hi. I said hi and I asked her if they closed at 9. She said they had closed early that night because of a short staff. Then she told me how she was stranded there and didn't have a ride. She asked me if I could give her a ride to the gas station. Now I don't know why, but I said yes. Maybe it was because I used to work at Chipotle, so I somehow felt like we were teammates or something. Or maybe it's just because she seemed like a nice person from the first interaction. But I agreed, and the woman followed me to my car. We both got inside, and when we did, I asked her where she was going. She mentioned a gas station's name that I hadn't heard of before, and she said that her friend would meet her there. I didn't know where the place was. When I said this, the woman mentioned that it was close by and then gave me an address. I still didn't know where it was, so she directed me as I drove. The gas station was actually really close by. It took less than 5 minutes to get there. However, it was kind of away from all the other businesses and in an area that was much quieter. And when I pulled into the parking lot, I realized that this gas station was completely closed. And not just closed, but abandoned. Every light was off. There were some spots in the parking lot with weeds growing out of them, and the place looked like it hadn't seen customers in months, if not years. There were also no other cars around. When I pulled into the parking lot, I asked if this was the right place, and she said yes. I told her that it appeared closed, and the woman told me that she was going to go and check anyways. I told her that I could clearly see no lights were on and the place seemed to be abandoned. Still, the woman told me that she wanted to just go and see if the place was open or not, and encouraged me to do so as well. When she said that for a second time, it really blew my mind because it was pretty obvious that the place was abandoned. I said that I was just going to leave there now. At first, the woman asked if she could just try and see if they were open and if I could wait for her. I said that I would drop her off at another gas station though, and I started to drive away at that point. She then reluctantly agreed. I went to the next nearest gas station that was probably less than a mile away. This one was actually open. I then dropped the woman off there. After leaving, I couldn't help but feel weird about the whole thing. Could she have been trying to set me up for something by making me go to the abandoned gas station? What would have happened if I had let her get out of my car and I waited for her, or if I had gotten out as well? I'm glad that I didn't. This happened just a few weeks ago. I order Chipotle all the time. Usually I get the same thing, and I order it a lot after work. So on this day in particular, it was like any other. I had just finished work and was on my way home. I ordered Chipotle on the app and was going to pick it up. I had done this so many times. By the time I would get the Chipotle, I would just run inside, get my bag from the shelf, and then be on my way. So I drove to the Chipotle, parked, and saw that my order was in fact ready. I got out of my car and walked inside. The restaurant was not too busy, but there were a few people around here and there. But one in particular I noticed right away. There was a larger man who wore glasses and had a mostly shaved head standing right in front of the shelf. It was the shelf where orders go for pickup, and I saw a single bag there which had to be mine. But this guy was like right in the way, blocking it. I was guessing that the guy had ordered online and was waiting for it to be done or something. So I walked up to the shelf, and I remembered that I said something like, "Sorry man, I gotta get my order here." He looked at me but did not move. I was now just standing right in front of him. He just stared at me with an annoyed look but did not say anything. I was surprised and had expected him to move out of the way. So after a few awkward seconds, the man actually got more in my way and then asked what I was doing. I pointed to the bag on the shelf and said that was my order and I was picking it up. I asked the man if he minded moving. The man said, "Yes, actually, I do mind." I didn't know why this guy was randomly being so difficult. I also didn't really know what to say. I asked him if he could hand it to me then, and he said no. I then tried to somehow move behind him and grab it without touching him. The guy moved though intentionally and bumped into me. I moved back and realized that for some reason, he was clearly not going to let me get my order. So after taking a few steps back, I just stood there. I figured the guy was waiting for his order, and once he received it, he would leave, and then I could get mine. As much as I wanted to fight the guy or whatever, I didn't want to get banned from a Chipotle for fighting some weirdo, so I waited. But the guy did not receive an order. At least 5 minutes went by, and the man didn't move at all. And the Chipotle really wasn't that busy. In fact, a few minutes went by where nobody was ordering or anything, so I started to wonder if this guy had even ordered anything at all. He was just standing there, kind of looking straight ahead. He never got an order. After several more minutes, I did not want to wait anymore. The man kind of seemed to let his guard down a little bit and had moved a few steps in front. I realized that if I was quick, I could go grab my order behind him and go. So I slowly and quietly positioned myself. Then I quickly walked right over and I grabbed the bag. As soon as I had it completely in my hands, the man suddenly moved back. It was no doubt intentional, and his back ran right into me and nearly knocked me over. But I didn't let it faze me. I kept going and I walked to the exit. However, the man turned and started to walk out after me. He followed me all the way outside and then to my car. When I got to my car, I opened up the door and got in the driver's seat. But the man stood there and blocked me from being able to close the door. I asked him what he was doing. He only cursed at me in response. He wouldn't move, so I couldn't shut the door. After cursing at me for almost a full minute, he finally kicked the side of my car and then walked away. I was finally able to leave. That guy made me really angry, and I have no idea why he was blocking me, and I really can't believe he decided to follow me to my car. I didn't go to that Chipotle for a while after that.
I used to work at a Chipotle. One day, I was working a super long shift from the afternoon right up until closing time. The day had its usual everyday customers with people rushing in and out, It was really busy for most of the time. At one point, I noticed there was a guy sitting by himself in the corner. I didn't think much of it until I saw him again a couple of hours later and he was still there. The guy was wearing sunglasses inside, but that was really the only thing about him that stood out to me. That and the fact that he wasn't eating anything. He wasn't on a laptop either, he was just looking around. It was sort of weird. As the day progressed and the rush hour hit, the man blended in with the crowd of people. Because of this, there were times that I didn't know if he was still there or not. I was busy working and not just watching the guy the whole time. The night went on and things settled down again. Eventually, it was time to close. I looked up and yet again, he was still there. I couldn't tell if he noticed me looking because of the angles, and his sunglasses were so dimmed and the light reflecting made it nearly impossible to see what he was looking at. So what was crazy is that they chose me to go and kick this guy out who had been sitting there all day. I was super nervous, but I gathered my courage and went up to him. I walked out from behind the counter and over to the man in the corner. I said, excuse me, sir, and my voice totally gave away my nervousness. I told him that it was closing time, but he didn't say a word. He just stared at me through his sunglasses with this intense look that freaked me out. Then, in this really creepy silence, the guy slowly got up from his seat, gave one last look around the restaurant, and left without saying a single word. My heart was pounding like crazy, and I had this weird feeling, but I tried to shake it off and tell myself it was all in my head. I had done it, and he was finally leaving. So me and my coworkers started doing our closing routine and cleaning up. The place was now empty. 2 of my coworkers said their goodbyes and left, and it was just one other person and me left to finish everything. We focused on our tasks and mostly just cleaning. Then, out of the blue, there was this loud knocking on the front door that made us jump. The knocking kept getting louder and more insistent, like somebody really wanted to get in. Panic started to come back, and I went to go see who it was. When I did, I saw that it was the same creepy guy with shades. With shaky steps, I walked up to the door, my hand trembling as I reached for the doorknob. Deep down, I wanted to just ignore him, but I didn't. I was really curious as to why the man had returned. He knew that we were closed. I asked him what he wanted, and his reply was in the tone of a whisper. I left my wallet inside. I could barely hear him, but when I understood what he said, I assumed that he would just come inside, get his wallet, and then leave. I was about to open up the door, but I looked over at my coworker instead. She was shaking her head from behind the counter and mouthing for me to not let him in. She then started to walk over. As she did, she asked me what the man had been saying. I told her that he had left his wallet, and she asked me where the man had been sitting. I pointed over to the table in the corner, the same place where he was basically all day. The man then said, "Just let me in." My coworker looked all around the table and floor and said that there was no wallet there. I relayed that message to the man, who insisted it was and knew exactly where. However, I chose not to let him in. I stepped away from the door as he stared at me. The man then suddenly ran off into the night. I went over and looked out the window, and by then, he was halfway across the parking lot. We searched very well, and there was certainly no wallet inside. I'm sure he was trying to trick us into letting him in, and then he would have done who knows what. It's been a while since this experience, and it still creeps me out every time I think about it. This happened about a year ago. It was around 9 p.m., and I was starving. I was craving Chipotle, and they were one of the only places still open. It was after 9 p.m., but the Chipotle didn't close until 10. I drove my SUV, the same car I've had since college, and parked a little ways away in the parking lot. As I pulled in, I saw that there were only 2 other cars there. I assumed they were likely the employees. This made me happy, and I knew that I wouldn't have to wait in line. I parked and then went inside. I ordered and was inside the restaurant for maybe a total of 5 minutes, probably less than that to be honest. Finally, with my burrito in hand, I headed back to my car. But as I approached it, some obvious fool had parked their car so close to mine that I couldn't even get into my driver's door. It would have been literally impossible. They were probably 6 inches from touching. I was really angry. I walked over to the other side of my car, which also had somebody parked on that side. But when I went to that side, I couldn't get in there as well. They were also parked way too close to me. I was wondering what was going on here. Both of the cars had tinted windows, and I couldn't really see inside. I decided to go over to the driver's door of the first car blocking me in. When I got over there, I looked in the driver's window and knocked on it. I soon saw, though, that nobody was in the driver's seat. This was really annoying me, and it was also slightly creepy. There were so many other parking spaces for them to go. It seemed like they were specifically trying to do this to me. As I walked back over towards my car, I heard doors opening. Then I saw two men coming out of the car on the other side of mine. They were large and dressed in all black. Immediately, I knew they were up to no good. I had a sudden idea, and I unlocked my car, then quickly opened the rear trunk door to the back of my car. I jumped inside of it, and with my keys in hand, hit the lock button. The guys reached the rear of my car in no time and started banging on it after trying to open it up. I jumped over my seat somehow until I had made it into my driver's seat. Then I started my engine. Obviously, I couldn't back up and was parked up against a curb. However, I did have four-wheel drive, and it was an SUV, so I said screw it and hit the gas. The car surged forward and up the curb. I then went onto a little sidewalk and then into a bit of grass. I turned and was able to make it back into the parking lot and drove away from the guys. They stayed by their cars and did not bother chasing after me. This remains one of the most bizarre things to ever happen to me, and one of the scariest as well. Not sure what those men had in store for me, but I'm glad I don't have to find out. Before I tell this story, keep in mind that I'm an 18-year-old girl that weighs as much as a piece of lettuce. I also don't have a fierce bone in my body, as I was never taught to handle problems with aggression growing up. So about a few weeks ago, after a crazy rush of people at Chipotle, things finally started to quiet down. I took the opportunity to go out and sweep the floors of the dining room so I could potentially get off early. It had been a really long day. Out of nowhere, this man walks into Chipotle, but instead of heading to order food, he makes a beeline straight towards me. He came up to me and said, "A man outside asked me to give this to you." Then he handed me an envelope. I was really confused, thinking of how weird this was. The man then just walked away and out of the restaurant. Confused and slightly freaked out, I quickly walked into the back and opened the envelope. Inside, there was a note telling me to meet someone at the park that night at 8 p.m. I did recognize the name of the park. Now, here's the thing. This park is just a short walk from my apartment. It's about at the end of the street. And to make things worse, the handwriting was incredibly nice. It was like something you'd see in the 1800s, and really nice cursive. Naturally, I got really freaked out by this whole situation, and I decided not to go. It just felt too risky. I was curious as to what would be at the park, but obviously didn't want to take any chances. That night, I didn't go, and nothing strange happened to me. But then, the very next day, I got this random text message from an unknown number who I assumed had something to do with the note the day before. The person was asking why I didn't show up at the park. I didn't want to engage with this person, so I ignored the message and blocked the number right away. Unfortunately, it gets worse. The following day, I found a note outside my apartment door, and it was from the same person. They were asking me why I blocked their number. Now I was questioning how they got my number and my address. I thought of all the people who could possibly be pulling a prank on me. I even asked a few people who I thought it might be possible with, but they all denied it. They all seemed genuinely concerned about my problem. And besides, how would that explain the random guy who walked into the Chipotle? I had never seen him before in my life. I was starting to feel like I was being watched or something, and it really freaked me out. At this point, I was thinking to myself that it couldn't get any worse, but it did. The next time I was at work, I had already been there for a few hours. I spotted this guy in a car outside, just sitting there and seemingly watching me. I really don't know how I noticed him, but I did. I had had enough. I figured that this guy had to do something with what had been happening, and I decided to tell my coworker who was working next to me at the time. His name is Ben, and when I told him how it seemed like the guy in the parking lot had been creepily watching me, and he was possibly stalking me as well, Ben sprung into action. This surprised me, but Ben almost seemed like he liked the idea of confronting this guy. He walked right out of the front doors of Chipotle. He marched over to the guy's car, but when he got maybe 20 feet away, the guy quickly backed up and drove off. After this encounter, I never saw the man again. I never got any more phone calls or notes either. I'm grateful to Ben for going to confront him, and I'm not sure who had been leaving me those notes or watching me, or what they wanted. I really think it was the guy in the car, and maybe he didn't know that I would see him watching me that day. I'm glad I never saw him again though. I used to work at a retail store several years ago. The store was in a shopping center that had basically all of the main stores and restaurants you could ask for within a several-mile radius. One night, I was working a later shift, but wasn't closing. I got off work at probably about 9 or 10 p.m. when everything had quieted down a bit. I began to walk to my car near the back of the parking lot, and after I made my long walk there, I arrived at my car and realized just how hungry I was. I turned around and saw Chipotle, which shared a general parking lot with us. When I looked, I suddenly got the craving for a Chipotle burrito bowl and turned around and walked back up. I got inside, and there was only 2 people in line in front of me. I got my food and then walked out to go back to my car at the end of the parking lot. When I arrived at my car, though, I saw that there was another car now parked 2 spaces over to my left, which was also the very last space at the corner of the parking lot. The hood of the car was up, and I saw a younger-looking man standing in front of it. As I got closer, the man approached me and asked me what I knew about cars. I told him not a whole lot, and asked him what had happened. The man said he didn't know, and asked me if I could maybe take a look inside his car. He explained to me that he had been sitting in the parking lot for over an hour trying to get it to start, but it just wouldn't. I asked the man if his car had been in this exact same parking spot the whole time, and he said yes. Now I suddenly knew that the man was lying about this, and I got suspicious because I had just been here 10 minutes earlier, and the man and the car were both not there. The man then told me to come around to the driver's side and look, which was the far side from where we were at. I noticed that there seemed to be some sort of blankets draped from the inside of the car windows, covering them so that you couldn't see inside. I told the man sorry, but I had to get back to work. The man insisted that I take a look in his car, but I had already began walking back to the department store where I worked. I calmly and casually walked back to my store, even though I was really nervous and wanted to run, but thankfully, the man didn't come after me or say anything more. I walked all the way back and got inside my store. Then I looked out the window at the parking lot where the man was. He was really far away, but I could see about 30 seconds after I got inside the store, I watched the man close his hood and then get inside his car and just drive off. I don't know exactly why that man wanted me to look at his car, but I feel like he was trying to set me up for something. A couple of years ago, when I was a little younger, I used to work at a Chipotle restaurant. I was in school and lived in an apartment near the city. Because of this, I was able to walk to work every single day because it only took me about 10 minutes and was better than city driving. I usually worked later shifts from the afternoons to close, or at least nighttime on weekdays. When I got off, I would walk home, and for the first few months of working there, everything was cool. But over time, I started to notice that it seemed as though somebody was following me home. I would often hear footsteps behind me, or see somebody trailing me from a far ways back. I had never noticed before, because in the past, almost every single time I had walked home, nobody else had been walking on the sidewalks at all. I only started noticing it because it was happening every single night. When I started to take notice, I would always notice the person would follow me to my apartment complex, but never go inside of the complex, and always walk right past it. This was strange to me because beyond our apartment complex, there really wasn't anything else in that direction. It was kind of just woods with no park or walking trail that I knew of. Every time I would see this guy, I would never get a good look at him because of it being dark out and him being so far away. He would also usually seem to be looking at the ground, so I really had no idea who he was or what he looked like. Still, I did know for sure, and for the time span of I would say 2 or 3 weeks, I would just walk home with this person behind me and ignore it. Then, one night after work, I got off a little bit early. It was a weekend, so I could stay up later, and my friend Anna invited me over. She lived in the opposite direction, but was also within walking distance from work. She lived in a little neighborhood about 15 minutes away. When I got off, I started to walk to Anna's place, but before long, I heard footsteps behind me, and once again was reminded of the man who was seemingly stalking me every time I worked. He was the only other person on the sidewalk once again, and as I looked behind me, he appeared to sure enough be the same guy. What this really did was confirm to me that this guy was in fact following me every single time, and I wasn't just being paranoid for no reason. When I finally got to Anna's neighborhood, I knew exactly which house was hers, so I turned onto a street immediately which led to her backyard, and then hid in there. I was so far ahead of the man that I knew he wouldn't see which way I went. I heard footsteps from a ways away, and then they went into an opposite direction. I then texted my friend Anna and she let me in her house. We hung out for a while, but about an hour later, Anna was in her kitchen and she said she saw a weird guy looking in her front window. My heart sank and I told her to come back to the living room where I was. I asked her what the man looked like and she said just pretty average. She went back to look again, but the man was gone. Of course, I immediately was worried that it was the same guy that had been following me, and I told Anna all about it. We weren't really sure what we could do about it though, and we didn't see him for the rest of the night. The next day, I went out and bought some mace that I could use in self-defense, although I was hoping it would never come to that. But the next day, I worked late. When I got off, I once again heard the footsteps behind me as if I was being followed. But this time, the footsteps didn't stay behind me for long. They seemed to be walking faster than usual. The man was walking really fast and quickly catching up to me. I walked faster and faster, but so did he. Eventually, he got so close to me that I decided to cross the street and walk on the other side. When I did, he did as well. We were not in a very busy or well-lit area, and it was just us on the sidewalk. The man started moving aggressively towards me suddenly. I couldn't take it anymore, and at that point, I saw him start to reach out for me, and I went for my pocket and pulled out the mace and sprayed it all over him. I got him good in the face, and the man jumped back and ran away. After that, I went home, and ended up going to the police a short time later. I'm happy to say that I was never followed again after that. I work at Chipotle. I've been working there for almost a year now. I like the job, and I've made friends with some of my coworkers, which I really like. For the most part, I like everything about the job, but of course, there are occasionally bad customers and things like that. One night, I was working a closing shift, and was mainly working behind the counter near the cash register. The night had been pretty average, which meant busy at dinner time, and then quieting down as the night went on. It was getting to be closing time, and we still had several customers inside. There was a man in the restaurant that I saw walking up to me. The man wore an older-looking jacket that seemed really worn, and he had a small, scruffy beard and wore sunglasses as well. He came up to me and asked if he could have some free chips. We weren't allowed to just give free chips out, so I told him sorry, but no. It was kind of awkward to say no, so I tried to say it in the nicest way that I could. The man just walked away without saying anything. We had, I think, 2 more total customers come in before it was just about closing time. The man once again came up to me and asked for free chips once the other customers had ordered. I told him no once again. I saw the man then start to walk up to the other customers in the restaurant and seemed to talk to them, but I couldn't really hear what he was saying. At one point, I could clearly see that the people he was talking to were not happy with whatever the guy was saying. The man then came back up to the counter and told me to give him something for free. At this point, I said the man would have to leave the restaurant. He got kind of angry at this, and at first, he said no. I was concerned that this was going to get out of hand and the man was not going to leave. But at last, the man finally turned and walked away. I was so happy to see that, because we were just closing at the same time too. I went over after that and began to clean some parts of the restaurant before I could leave. There were 2 other coworkers who stayed back and were cleaning with me. They were mainly in the back, and I went out to the rest of the restaurant and cleaned a little. When I got to the bathrooms, I walked in to make sure everything was in order. Everything looked fine at first, until I noticed that one of the stall doors was closed. I tried to open it, but saw that it was locked. Obviously, we were closed, and nobody was supposed to be in there, and I didn't see anybody's feet on the floor from under the stall. I decided to crawl under the stall to unlock it. But as soon as I did, I saw that the same man from before was standing on the toilet, crouched over, looking right at me. As he saw me, he sprang up and looked like he was going to try to kick me right in the face. I backed off as fast as I could and ran away as he kicked the stall door. He then opened it, and I ran out of the entire restaurant. Thankfully, the man chased me out, and once he was out, I ran as fast as I could away from there. I was much faster than him, and lost him pretty easily. I called one of my coworkers, who then called the police about the incident. To all of our surprise, the man returned once again, and the police were able to arrest him at the scene. He turned out to be on drugs, but it made for a crazy night.
I worked at Chipotle for about 3 years. This is the creepiest thing that I've ever experienced working there. One night, after a busy day at work, it was almost closing time, so I went to sweep the floors before we closed up. There was only one person still in the restaurant at this time. It was a pretty average-looking man who appeared to be in his 30s. He was just sitting at the corner table looking down and didn't have any food. I ignored him and kept sweeping. Once it was time to close, I told the man that we were closing and he would have to leave. He looked up at me and just stared at me like he was confused. I said again that we were now closed. He nodded his head at me, and I walked away expecting him to leave. After I walked away, I saw him get up, but instead of walking to the door to leave, he went to the bathrooms. I was kind of annoyed, but what could I do? I just hoped he wouldn't be long in the bathroom. I finished sweeping and then waited. About 5 minutes went by, and I decided to go into the bathroom to tell the man he needed to leave. When I got into the bathroom, there was nobody in there. I couldn't believe my eyes. I know I saw him go in the men's bathroom. I went out and looked in the women's, which was also empty. I don't know how that man could have left. There was no exit at the back of the restaurant. We just locked up and went home, and I never saw the man again. In the summer of 2019, I was an employee at a Chipotle restaurant. For the most part, I liked the job. I would do a little bit of everything. One afternoon, after the rush of lunch, it quieted down and I went to clean the seating area, which had gotten a little messy. As I cleaned, I noticed that a man sitting by himself at a table kept staring at me and was watching me wherever I went. It didn't really bother me at all that much, and I just kept working. After I was done cleaning, I worked the cash register. I worked there for 2 more hours, and then at 4 p.m., my shift was over and it was time to go home. When I went to leave, I noticed that the man was still there. I was shocked at why he would still be here. I had no idea why. His eyes watched me as I walked out the door and toward my car. As I got in my car, I noticed him leave Chipotle as well. This made me concerned, and I quickly drove home. The next time I worked, I noticed the man again. He walked into the restaurant and immediately started looking around until he saw me. I was glad I didn't have much time left in my shift. He sat down at a table and just watched me work until I was off, which was only about 20 minutes. I walked out to my car and left again. The man, of course, left as soon as I did as well. This time, however, I noticed he started following me in his car as I was driving home. I got about halfway home and decided to turn around and go back to Chipotle. I did not want this man knowing where I live. I made a U-turn and the man did the same. As I was pulling into the Chipotle restaurant, I noticed a police car parking and I drove over and parked next to it. The man following me pulled into the lot and then turned around and pulled out. He drove away. I didn't see the man after that, and I quit just a month later. I don't go to that Chipotle anymore in fear of seeing the man. I'm just glad he never found out where I live. About a year ago, a friend and I went to Chipotle on a summer night. It was 9-something at night, and Chipotle closed at 10, so we ate on a table they had on a little patio outside. It was a nice night and very comfortable out. The Chipotle wasn't that busy with it being almost closing time. It was on the end of a little strip mall with some other restaurants and a phone service store. As we were eating, we heard a noise coming from the bushes near us. I thought maybe a squirrel or a duck had wandered over, but it sounded bigger than that. The noise went away after about a minute. We heard it a couple more times, but we assumed it was just a little animal and didn't think much of it. My friend and I ended up leaving just before one of the workers was about to lock the doors. We got in my car and sat for about a minute before seeing a man emerge from the bushes that we had been sitting near. He walked into the side entrance of Chipotle and went directly behind the counter. We realized the noise we were hearing was a man the whole time. He had on a backpack and wore a baseball cap. Other than that, I couldn't really make out much detail. After a couple seconds of watching him, we realized that he appeared to be robbing the place. We saw him and the worker behind the counter talking, and the worker had a pretty concerned look on his face. My friend and I decided to call the police. They said they would arrive shortly, but after about 2 more minutes, the man ran back out the side door and into the bushes again. The police arrived a minute later, and we told them all we could. They also spoke to the Chipotle worker for a long time. I'm not sure if the man was ever caught, but knowing he waited right behind us in the bushes before he robbed the place really creeps me out.